she was designated as the border czar, I think some 3 years ago. How they think they can reverse the correct perception that this administration has created a border crisis is beyond me. And it's just another reason why I think the American people want to go in a different direction. In addition to that, the Vice President also was the key vote on the $2.6 trillion in the two bills in the first 2 years that created 40-year inflation. So whether it's chaos at the border or prices at the grocery store, this administration owns the most serious policy shortcomings that they've made during the last 4 years.
Well, we have spoken at length about the Vice President's role as the border czar, but we also need to talk a little bit about her role as the broadband czar. Because 3 years ago, the President directed Vice President Harris to be in charge of ensuring that the $42 billion that was authorized 3 years ago actually got out to serve underserved areas, hook up people who don't have broadband to broadband service. That was 1,043 days ago. $42 billion, not a single dollar has been spent, not a single person has been connected to broadband service under this program, under the watch and supervision of the so-called broadband czar, Vice President Kamala Harris. And so as yet another example of the failure of this administration, their inability to do basic things. And one of the reasons they didn't get people hooked up, and none of the money has yet been spent, is because of all the onerous and burdensome restrictions and regulations and requirements and mandates they imposed on the use of the funds. I can tell you in the state of South Dakota, we don't have a single telecom out there that's been able to use any of this because they make it so hard to qualify for. You got to meet all their climate requirements. You got to meet all their DEI requirements. You have to meet all their requirements to use union workers, which in right-to-work states, it makes it very, very difficult. So this is just yet another example of this administration's failure. Since this president and vice president took office, there have been 1,000 regulations that have cost $1.7 trillion. That's $1.7 trillion taken out of the economy, and that's over 5 times what the Obama administration's cost of regulations was. So, and they weren't exactly known as being, an administration that was willing or ready to cut red tape. So again, just another example of this administration's failure, their inefficiency, their management, and their inability to do the basic things of governing well. And I can't help but think what if Vice President Harris is successful, what the next 4 years could look like if she takes her record as broadband czar and border czar to running the whole of government. I think that's a world that the American people shouldn't and hopefully won't have to enter.
Kamala Harris and the Democrats have turned America into a gigantic magnet for illegal immigrants. They did it by giving free health care, free housing, free cell phones, free debit cards loaded with taxpayer cash. And now Democrats want to give illegal immigrants the right to vote. Communities all across this country are much more dangerous today than they were before Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came into this country as president and as vice president, because they have rolled out the red carpet for terror suspects, for criminal cartels, for drug dealers. 10 million illegal immigrants have come into the country. Kamala Harris, as vice president, has overseen as drug czar communities where Venezuelan gang lords have taken over apartment complexes, terrorized communities. That's why 3 out of 4 Americans say the country is headed in the wrong direction. Kamala Harris has been in office now for over 1,300 days. She is the presidential candidate of high prices and of an open border. Or as a friend of mine in Wyoming says, a wide open border, sky-high prices. People know they were better off when Donald Trump was president of the United States. Prices are 20% higher today than they were the day that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris came into office. Families are being crushed by these high prices. What does Kamala Harris want to do about it? She wants to raise taxes even higher. What does she want to do with the money? Give more things to more illegal immigrants. This is foolish, it's reckless, it's un-American. These liberal policies by the Democrats who are running for office, these are policies that are un-American. What we need to do is to make sure we put America first. And voters are going to have a chance to do that come November 5th.
The United Nations has convened their General Assembly in New York City. And today we heard from President Joe Biden, his final major policy speech in front of the UN. And let me tell you, folks, the free world, they are breathing a sigh of relief, because President Joe Biden, in this last speech, the last major speech of his presidency, he did not stand up for Israel. He did not discount and speak about anti-Semitism rolling across our country. Instead, what the free world has recognized is that in the Biden-Harris administration, we have had a world of chaos and uncertainty. So yes, the free world is very glad to see him go. But what we see is Vice President Kamala Harris, who owns this policy, the policy of sowing chaos and uncertainty around the globe. Not just in Afghanistan, and we'll all remember that fateful fall in 2021, but we will always remember the disinterest that this administration took when Russia invaded Ukraine. And certainly we will always remember what is going on in the Middle East that kicked off nearly a year ago on October 7th, when Hamas, backed by Iran, invaded Israel and killed innocent elderly people, raped women, murdered babies. And yet, this administration under Kamala Harris and Joe Biden allowed the leadership of Iran visas to come into the United States and attend the United Nations General Assembly, and gave them platform in this free country. We're tired of the hatred that is being fomented by this administration. Kamala Harris owns this. Iran is with Kamala Harris. You will see Iran interfering in our election, admittedly tapping into the Trump campaign. We will see Iran continuing to go after Americans, former administration officials, where they have open contracts on the heads of people like Mike Pompeo, of President Trump, of Ambassador Bolton. We allowed, through Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, these people to come into our country. You bet they're praying for a Kamala Harris administration, because she will continue to appease Iran and those that hate America. We need a change, and it will happen in this next election.
Well, thank you all for being here again, and I'm going to join the chorus of talking about the flip-flopping and the uncertain positions and opposite positions that the Vice President has taken through this administration. We've heard about her being the border czar, the broadband czar, and now we've heard and we know that under the fall of Afghanistan, she was the last person in the room that she touts herself on that disastrous decision of leaving Afghanistan, having our Americans be killed in the pursuit of that exit and also what's happened to that country. So after the botched withdrawal, the Taliban has started their assault on the rights of women and girls. And I'll say this, we hear a lot about who's going to treat women better, the Republicans, the Democrat, Harris or Trump. Let me just tell you what Harris has done with the women around the world. They have abandoned the Afghan women and girls that they claimed that they would protect. So back then in the New York Times, there was a headline, Kamala Harris pledges U.S. help for Afghan women and children, August 26, 2021. The Wall Street Journal editorial board just this week, I believe, said, and I quote, "The chaotic withdrawal has done more harm to more women than anything in decades, while jihadists have revived their terror sanctuary. Today in Afghanistan, women and girls are now being punished for speaking out loud in public, for failing to cover their entire body and face, for looking at men other than their husbands or relatives, and for publicly laughing." A young Afghan teenage girl was quoted by the BBC as saying, if we can't speak, why even live? The Economist characterized it as the Taliban is removing every shred of freedom from women. Again, The Economist, the Taliban is removing every shred of female for women. This is a quote from just last week, September 19th, 2024. 3 years ago, I joined, and Joni and I joined, every single female member of the United States Senate, imploring the administration to look after what you could see the growing problem of the horrible treatment of the Taliban towards women, imploring the Biden-Harris administration to protect Afghan women and girls. It's landed on deaf ears. We see by what we read it every day or every week. It's a new rule. It's a new ordinance that women and girls, they don't go to school. I mean, that was way decided several years ago. But they're just piling it on, and the bad news is they're enforcing all of this and really creating terror among their own country.
So I've heard about the border czar, I've heard about the broadband czar. Kamala Harris is also the tie-breaking czar, having broken more ties as vice president in the U.S. Senate than any other vice president in our nation's history, surpassing both John Calhoun and John Adams. And look at the wreckage left behind from these tie-breaking votes. Sky-high prices have driven groceries and housing costs through the roof. Wide open southern border has allowed terrorists and dangerous criminals into our communities. The Biden-Harris EPA administrator accused the good people of Montana of, quote, cheating the system. That's their words, not mine, when it comes to our very own Colstrip power plant that provides badly needed baseload power to so many Montanans and Americans. Radical environmental policy, killing mining jobs, including 700 just recently in the last 2 weeks in Montana. The Biden-Harris appeasement of Iran led to wars and instability abroad. This is the record of Joe Biden and his Vice President Kamala Harris. Keep in mind, they've been in office for 1,363 days. They've had 3.5 years to fulfill their promises. An administration that promised bipartisanship, soaring rhetoric of hope. They weren't talking about joy back then, but hope has only brought destruction and despair. Senate Democrats could have stopped this. Remember, Democrat economist Larry Summers warned in the spring of 2021 not to spend more money because it would cause inflation to skyrocket. They didn't listen, so here we are. Americans now battling, living paycheck to paycheck. Thanks to the Biden-Harris economy, they're having to take dollars that should be helping the American people, instead giving free stuff to illegal immigrants. American miners losing jobs because of the Biden-Harris policies. And, of course, we've got war abroad. The American people, I'm confident, will choose a different course 6 weeks from today.
I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to really miss Manu over the next 5 years.
As a leader of your party, would you recommend that Republicans abandon the North Carolina gubernatorial candidate Mark Robinson over his lewd and graphic posts on a porn website?
Well, it won't surprise you to know that I'm happy that there's not a Senate race in North Carolina.
Leader McConnell,
Alex?
former President Trump has proposed a 200% tariff on John Deere tractors if they're made in Mexico. Are you concerned that some of these tariff proposals by the GOP nominee could drive up costs for consumers or hurt urban exporters in Kentucky, for example?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of tariffs. They raise the prices for American consumers. I'm more of a free trade kind of Republican that remembers how many jobs are created by the exports that we engage in. So I'm not a tariff fan.
Leader McConnell, given the difficulty of passing appropriations bills and the real possibility you could control the majority after the November election, would you expect to delay the appropriations process again with another CR into next year? And what about the authorization bills like NDAA and the Farm Bill?
Well, this has been a very, very unproductive Congress on things that we are supposed to do, like passing appropriation bills, doing a farm bill every 5 or 6 years. We had some of those problems when we were in the majority, but not as many of them. It leads you to believe that the current majority leader believes that they benefit from having everything kind of balled up in the end. So unbreaking the appropriations process ought to be near the top of both parties, because this is not the way to run the government. And the problem I had when I was majority leader on this issue is the Democratic leader would tell the Democrats on the Appropriations Committee not to cooperate. So there's plenty of blame to go around, but I think fixing the appropriations process is something that ought to be bipartisan and needs to be done.
Leader McConnell,